This is the horrific story of a killer that wiped out several generations of an entire family in one single night. This will have you checking that your attic hatch is bolted shut tonight. And as you'll find out at the end of the video, the thing that's most disturbing is the fact that it's based on true events. This story covers a couple, Rachel and Dan, who just bought a beautiful farm property in a rural area, Germany. It was absolutely stunning. So you could peer out of the windows and all you could see is fields, farmland and woodland. Now they moved to this property with Dan's older parents, so Dave, who was 64, Pam, his mother, who was 63, and they had three beautiful children. So they had 15-year-old Jessie, so that was their eldest daughter, and 8-year-old Thomas, and a 3-year-old daughter called Amy. Dan actually had a local friend that he'd meet up every morning for coffee, and he met with his friend Jimmy. And he actually reported to Jimmy that he'd heard some kind of weird scratching and scraping sound coming from his attic, and it had woken him at around 1:30 a.m. that morning. And he just assumed that it was rats or something like that. However, Jimmy would very, very soon find out that it wasn't rats that were in the attic. After Dan returns home from his coffee with Jimmy, he met up with his father. They went up actually onto the roof of the property and they decided to start planning what they'd be doing the following day. So Dan had arranged for some supplies to be delivered the following morning, and they were going to fix like some leaky areas in the roof. It had been quite some time since anybody had retiled the property. Dan and his dad figured that they were going to be quite busy working on this roof over the next couple of weeks, so they decided to take the rest of the day off and they would just spend some time with the children and their wives. So they arranged a big barbecue for that evening and they spent some time in the garden enjoying the sun and the scenery. The following day at 10 a.m, the delivery man came with the tiles for the roof. And he tried knocking on the front door several times, got no response. He tried looking in the windows and he decided that he would go around the back. It's quite a large house, so he wanted to see if perhaps the family around eating in the kitchen just hadn't heard him knocking. As the delivery driver approached the back door, he saw a blooded hand smear on the door frame of the rear door. With this, he decided that he would go back to his local depot and he would just let his boss know. The delivery driver's boss knew Dan well enough to know that him not responding, him not being there when he said he would be, was extremely out of character. This, coupled with the fact that he'd actually spoke to Dan the day previous just to confirm the delivery time, and the fact that there was also the blood on the door frame, was enough for the boss to think, okay, we're not going to take any risks here, let's just call the police, something doesn't feel quite right here. With that, they called the local police department and spoke to Officer Schmidt, who agreed that there was enough concern for him to go around and do a welfare check on the family. Schmidt, a local officer of 20 years, just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right with this report. The blood, the fact they wasn't answering, there was quite a large family living at this property, just made him feel really uneasy. So straight away, he hopped in his squad car and he drove to that property. Now Schmidt called out, he banged the door, he tried opening the front door, it was still locked, he tapped on the windows, he tried peering in. Nothing looked kind of undisturbed or overly concerning from downstairs and what he could see from the downstairs windows. He then went round the back and sure enough, he saw this kind of blooded handprint on the frame of the back door. With that, he reported into his local police station. He said, look, something's not right, no one's answering and there's blood here. They agreed that they would send backup immediately and that he should try gain access through the rear door. Schmidt decided that he was just going to give this door one single kick, which he did, and with that, the back door went flying open. Schmidt pulled out his pistol, he kind of searched and he cleared each room downstairs. He then started walking up the stairs. He got midway up the stairs and he noticed that the latch to the attic was wide open. He found this slightly odd and he just decided that he would kind of proceed with a little more caution as he passed that area, knowing that he wouldn't be able to clear whatever was in the attic. Schmidt soon enough would come to Dan and Rachel's door. He took a deep breath and he walked in. What Officer Schmidt saw in that room disturbed him for the rest of his life. He saw Rachel there. She'd been bludgeoned to death. It appeared in her sleep. There was no signs of struggle and she was still laying there with her eyes shut. Next to her was Dan. He had had his throat cut. Both of them laid in a huge pool of blood. The carpet was soaked, the bedding was soaked. The whole scene just looked like something from a horror movie. And even though he was a seasoned officer of 20 years, he had never seen anything quite like it. Officer Smith knew that he was going to have the very difficult job of having to clear the rest of the house, knowing that there was children in that home and that Dan's elderly parents also lived with them. With that, he took a second deep breath and he decided it was going to go move on to the next room. With a raised gun, Officer Smith stepped into the room. He then saw that Dan's mum Pam had been beheaded. Her head lay on the pillow next to her body. Dave lay next to her. His whole skull had been crushed through blunt trauma. Once again, Officer Smith took a deep breath and stepped out of the room. Officer Smith went into the third bedroom. What Detective Smith saw in this bedroom made the seasoned detective of 20 years begin violently vomiting and eventually breaking down into tears, having to leave the property. Officer Smith, wiping tears from his eyes and vomit from his mouth, radioed in to inform the station that everyone in the property had died. He had found all 3 children lined up on the floor. They had 2 been bludgeoned to death. After an extensive investigation, it was thought that the killer had been hiding in the attic for quite some time. They found drink containers, food wrappers, and they had even found cigarette ends. No one knows to this day exactly what happened that evening, but it's thought that whoever it was up there crept down from the attic late at night while our family remained sleeping, went into each room and brutally attacked and murdered each individual, killing all 7 people, wiping out 3 generations of Dan's family. There are no real reports of Dan and Rachel's murders, but the origin of this story could be related to the infamous 1922 Gruber family murders of Hinterkaifeck Farm, in which one of the maids at the home left abruptly after stating that she could hear something or someone in the attic of the main farmhouse. 6 months after this report, the new maid and 3 members of the Gruber family were each lured individually to the barn, where something or someone bludgeoned each of them to death by striking them with a mattock, which is an axe-like tool. The killer would then drag each body to the corner of the barn, cover them up with hay. The 2 final Gruber family members were bludgeoned to death in their sleep and were found in their beds in the main house. 4 days after the murders, a repairman comes to fix the feeding machine. He knocks round at the family's house, but he can't get a response. He takes note that the dog is inside at the time of his arrival. He decides to go and do the job and hopes that somebody will return and come out and greet him at some point during the time that he's fixing the feeder. At the time of him finishing the job, he then noticed that the dog was then tied outside. He knocked round the house once more, still couldn't find anybody, so he decided to visit the Gruber's neighbours. He explained to the neighbours that he thought that somebody could be in because the dog was inside at his arrival and then was tied outside as he was leaving, but that he still couldn't get anybody, and he asked that the neighbours let the Grubers know that he had been, that he had fixed the farm feeder. This then prompted the Grubers' neighbours to go and check on the Grubers, as they hadn't seen them for a few days themselves. Sure enough, they too found the dog tied outside, and it was when they then went into the barn they found the grim discovery of the 4 bodies. They then reported this to the authorities immediately. One of the most disturbing factors about this incident is that police discovered that the killer continued to live in the Grubers' home for a remainder of 4 days after the murders. He'd been sleeping in their beds, lighting fires, milking the cows, eating their food, and there was no money taken or expensive items. This case still remains unsolved to this day. If you enjoyed this story, please do like and subscribe.